Welcome back to Liquid Lunch. Bill Cortez here, filling in for John Tobacco. With us, our first guest today is Ozzie Paloma, who's the managing director of Chartwell Strategy Group, a lobbying firm based in Washington, D.C. Ozzie, you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening down in Washington right now. A lot happening this week, a lot that we have to look forward to this week as well. Do you want to give a little recap on the latest veto override of that defense bill and what's happening down there right now?
Certainly. Thanks, Bill, and happy to be here with you. Probably a little bit more activity than we expected for this end of the year week in Washington. As you alluded to, the president did veto the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act last week, sent that back to the Hill. The House voted yesterday to override that veto at a pretty significant margin. I think it was 322 to 87, kicking that over to the Senate. Timing on the Senate's a little less clear. You've got a couple of senators, including Bernie Sanders and Ed Markey, who have vowed to hold up that process and essentially use it as a leverage point to have the Senate vote on the $2,000 additional stimulus that the president pushed for as part of kind of his stimulus COVID relief negotiation effort. So the timing's a little less clear, but again, I think it's up to Leader McConnell now to kind of set the stage about when this vote does take. My understanding is that the veto override will be successful. It will move forward. But the question is, are there policy implications and timing with respect to the essential gimmick that Sanders and Markey are pulling with holding it hostage for the stimulus bill additional vote? So
let's talk about that $2,000 stimulus. The House previously passed and the Senate previously passed the $600 stimulus checks. The president was pushing and ultimately signed the $600 stimulus, but is pushing now a $2,000 stimulus check. What are we seeing in the Senate here, and what are the obstacles that we see with this $2,000 going through, and what are the breakdowns along some of the more conservative and moderate factions within the Republican Party in the Senate?
Yeah, look, I think the president over the last week and a half or so has been very vocal about his push to include additional stimulus, direct payments to individuals that have been impacted by COVID, which obviously there's been many. I think the unfortunate aspect of it was the timing. You had pretty kind of fragile negotiations that turned out a stimulus package that had broad bipartisan support. That $600 initial figure was something that was negotiated with the president's spokesperson, or I guess intermediary, Secretary Mnuchin. So for him to come out and push for an additional stimulus, I think while the point and the sentiment is spot on, I think the president has over the years really developed and has shown that he's got the pulse of the American worker pretty close in hand and understands kind of what's needed. I think the timing and the process of it was a little bit flawed as far as timing and what could get done. That being said, I think part of the reason that the president did end up signing the stimulus, which was great for all, was a commitment by particularly some in the Senate that he would receive a vote on his $2,000 additional stimulus check effort. The House cleared that effort yesterday. There was some Republicans that did cross in a bipartisan fashion to support the Democrats in voting for that. And since then, again, the path is a little less clear over in the Senate, but you have had some higher profile senators come out in support of the $2,000 payment, including Senator Marco Rubio, which recently came out in support of that. You had Senator Hawley from Missouri, who actually came out pretty early in an odd couple pairing, joining Senator Sanders, calling for the $2,000 stimulus. So there is some kind of support in the Senate that crosses political lines. I think the interesting thing will be to see the timing. In order for McConnell to get this through, it's going to require 60 votes. I don't know if there's 12 Republicans that cross the line and support the Democrats in this $2,000 additional stimulus vote. But that's getting worked on right now. I think in addition to the implications that it currently has today, there's no doubt that this will have implications going forward, politically speaking. The midterm elections are right around the corner, believe it or not, even though we just got through 2020, you've got 2022 very shortly on the horizon. And then you've also started to see people jockeying for potential 2024 runs, depending on what the president chooses to do, if he chooses to run again or not. You're going to have some folks out there that throw their hat in the ring. And then this vote, including some of the senators that are considering 2024, this vote will have implications on how they unfold their political strategy moving forward.
It's interesting, and I believe that Senator Hawley and Senator Rubio is going to face his own reelect and potential primary in 22. Do you think Marco Rubio takes another shot, and then some of this is positioning for a 24 run for president again from Rubio?
Yeah, and look, I think it's been long reported, and we've seen it since President Trump won, the primary back in 15 and 16, that there's this type of Trump populism that has really crept into the Republican Party. I think in years back, an additional stimulus of $2,000 when something just passed that was $600 on top of expanded unemployment benefits. I think this would have been a line not many Republicans, if any, would have crossed. But again, the ideology has shifted a little bit, some within the National Party, to include this form of Trump populism. And they understand that this ultimately is the benefit for the American worker. And that's a key constituency in that Republican base moving forward, both for midterm efforts and for the 2024 cycle, which kicked off immediately once the race was certified. So.
Oz, I think there's a certain group, certainly in the Republican caucus, that for years kind of hammered President Obama on deficit spending, on what the national deficit was, on what the national debt was. It's interesting now to see them rush to kind of put another stimulus package through. How do they wrap their heads around that? And how do they justify this, number one, to their political constituency in a Republican primary, but also to the American people as we continue to add trillions and trillions on to the national debt? How do Republicans kind of square that hole?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Bill. I think that there's no doubt that the amount of deficit spending has skyrocketed, and obviously we're facing an economic and health crisis. So things needed to get done early on the onset in order to get us through this. But hey, I've got small children. I'm worried about their future. We keep borrowing at the same time. Unlike in previous administrations, perhaps the economic structure behind the borrowing, for example, money's cheap today. So perhaps there's a little bit of easing into saying, hey, we can borrow because the rates are so low and we can pay this back, et cetera. But I think that there's no doubt that Republicans are really going to have to come to terms with what that means for their ideology and political agenda moving forward. Now, you've seen some folks, we'll use Senator Lindsey Graham as an example. Senator Graham, if Republicans do hold the Senate following the two runoffs in Georgia next week, Senator Graham is slated to become chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. In years past, the Senate Budget Committee is a committee that necessarily doesn't do a whole lot. But I think Senator Graham has indicated that he's going to use that purge to focus on the debt and deficit moving forward. And I think you're going to start seeing that shift. It's about, we need to start paying attention now that we've essentially gotten through the economic hardship of the pandemic, although there will be a lagging effect. What does the next 5, 10, 15 years look like from a debt and deficit structure? And they're going to have to come to terms with the fact that they were also responsible for some of the spending. But again, politics in this form will be forward-looking, not backward-looking.
Interesting. So moving forward, as we're talking about moving forward, there is a little race or a couple of races down in Georgia that we may have heard about for Senators Perdue and Loeffler to hold on to those seats in those special elections. Oz, what do you see the insights in terms of the race in Georgia, what that means also for potential majority or minority for McConnell or Schumer in the next Congress?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, by and large, I can't imagine there is a single voter that remains in Georgia who hasn't made up their mind as far as they're supporting. But I think there's a lot of voters that have yet to figure out how to get to the polls come January 5th. If you take a look at some early voting, Democrats really kind of outperformed where they were in the general election with getting their base to vote early by mail. Republicans closed that gap once in-person early voting kicked off, and I believe it was December 14th. Now it remains to be seen if Republicans are successful to getting the remnants of their base out on January 5th for the actual in-person vote. Now you've got the president going down there this weekend to hold a rally in Dalton, which is give or take about 150 miles, maybe a little less outside of Georgia. Outside of Atlanta, pardon. And that's going to be one of those key constituencies that really needs to turn out for the president, for Loeffler and Perdue in order to carry the campaign forward. But it's going to be close. I think, it's a base turnout election. Both camps have raised an exorbitant amount of money. I don't think money is an issue, as we saw with some of these races in November. You had Democratic candidates that were flush with cash that came up extremely short and actually fell on their face. But I think in this case, it turns out to be a race for the ground game and getting their electorate there. And Republicans, again, I think most Democrats have voted to date. Republicans really need that base to turn out January 5th.
It'll be certainly the race to watch on January 5th. January 6th, and we'll wrap it up with this. January 6th, it's going to come down to Mike Pence, I think, presiding over the Senate to wrap things up. Oz, we're going to wrap things up too and go to break. Thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Happy holidays.